The thumping started as nothing more than a distant echo, pulsing through the late afternoon air of suburban Austin. At first, it was easy to ignore, like the bass from a neighbor's party 2 blocks over. But within moments, it was impossible to tune out. The sound grew until it wasn't just heard, but felt, thrumming in my ribcage, rattling the glasses on the patio table, sending my father's carefully pruned roses quivering under the onslaught. I didn't flinch. Years in the army had taught me not to. I stood on the back deck, letting the wild Texas wind whip my hair across my face. The summer air was thick with heat and the scent of fresh-cut grass, mingling with the faint tang of barbecue still lingering from my father's latest attempt at suburban royalty. My father, Frank Miller, a man who measured his worth in perfectly mowed lawns, country club memberships, and the gleam of his Lexus, stood a few feet away, spatula in hand, looking every inch the king of his castle. Or he did, until the wind from the rotor blades of the helicopter flattened his prized roses, sending petals flying like confetti. His face twisted from confusion to pure outrage, the kind that never quite knew whether to yell or just combust on the spot. In that moment, all I could think was how fitting it was that this was how my two worlds would finally collide, right here, in the yard where I'd spent my entire childhood trying to be invisible. My mother, Diane, had always hated conflict, preferring silence over fairness. She stood near the kitchen door, frozen, her hand pressed to her chest as if she could stop her heart from leaping out of her body. My brother Alex, the family's golden boy, watched the helicopter descend with his jaw hanging open, car keys dangling from his fingers, a different kind of badge, but a badge all the same. No one said a word. Even the neighborhood kids, usually so eager to invade our yard, leave sticky handprints on the fence, and trample the flower beds, stood transfixed at the property line, mouths agape, eyes wide with the kind of awe that only a Black Hawk helicopter can conjure. And me? I felt strangely calm, almost serene, as the wind tangled my ponytail and slapped the screen door against the siding. I had always known this day would come, maybe not quite like this, with a military helicopter landing outside my parents' house in the heart of Austin, but some kind of reckoning had always felt inevitable. I took a slow breath, savoring the coolness of the air displaced by the spinning blades, and looked at my father, really looked at him. His whole life was unraveling in front of his neighbors, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I caught his gaze, held it, and said, loud enough to be heard over the roar, "My ride's here." The words cut through the chaos like a bullet. My father's face shifted from anger to disbelief so quickly it was almost comical. My mother's hand dropped from her chest, her lips parted in a silent gasp, and Alex actually took a step back, as if the universe had just rearranged itself in a way he could no longer understand. But I didn't let myself enjoy the moment. Not yet. Because, in truth, this had all started 48 hours earlier, at a family dinner so thick with tension you could have carved it with the steak knife my brother was using to signal his new promotion. My family had gathered around the dining table, our own little altar to achievement, to celebrate Alex's latest move up the corporate ladder. As always, my father led the chorus of praise, toasting his son's ambition near and a drive with the same energy he reserved for his annual bonus. Alex lounged at the head of the table, flicking the keys to his new company SUV with a self-satisfied grin. My father clapped him on the back, laughter echoing through the house, laughter I'd learned long ago was not meant for me. It was thick, that night. The air, the silence, the expectations. Like every dinner before it, I sat quietly at the end of the table, listening to their voices rise and fall, occasionally catching a word directed at me. "So, Macy," my father finally said. drawing out my name like it was a joke. "Is still taking the bus to that government job of yours? Must be hard saving up for a car on a military salary." Alex's laugh was sharp and mean. Even my mother winced. I tried not to let it sting. Years of being the family's afterthought had made my skin tough, but every word was still another notch in the ledger I'd kept since high school. Every missed birthday, every ignored achievement, every a money's tighty that only seemed to apply to me. This time, though, I wasn't alone. Sitting beside me was Dr. Linda Harper, a longtime family friend who just happened to be a senior analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency, a woman who'd sat across briefing tables with me, who knew exactly who I was when the uniform went on. Her eyes flickered from my father to me, her face a careful mask, but I caught the discomfort there, the way she shifted in her chair. She knew, maybe better than anyone, how many layers of cover I lived under. My father, in his careless ignorance, had just outed my government jobby in front of someone who understood the difference between what I was allowed to say and what I actually did. A cold, hard anger began to simmer under my skin, different from the shame I usually felt. This wasn't just about me anymore. My father had just turned a private humiliation into a professional liability. He thought he was just teasing his disappointing daughter. He had no idea what kind of storm he'd just set in motion. To understand what happened next, you'd have to know the two lives I lived. There was Mason Miller, the daughter my parents tolerated, and then there was a Raven, the Army intelligence officer whose world existed behind locked doors and cryptic briefings. My family saw only the first version, a young woman whose achievements were always measured against Alex's and always found wanting. To my father, I was the supporting character in Alex's story, a reason to brag about his brilliant, ambitious son. The living room shelves were crammed with Alex's high school football trophies, his college awards, even a glass-etched plaque from his first sales job. My own medals, from army training, from deployments he never asked about, sat in a box under my childhood bed. But what no one at that dinner table realized, except for Dr. Harper, was that I was in the middle of something far more consequential than any sales conference. My cover as a low-level civilian at a federal agency kept my family comfortably oblivious, but it was a mask I wore for their protection as much as my own. Army intelligence wasn't just a job, it was a world that demanded secrecy at every turn. Still, at home, I let them believe what they wanted. It was easier than trying to explain why I never talked about work or why I disappeared for weeks at a time with no warning. They preferred to see me as a harmless government drone, someone whose lack of ambition made them feel better about their own accomplishments. I stopped trying to change their minds long ago. But that night, as the dinner dragged on and Alex's promotion became the unofficial theme, I felt the old frustration rising. It wasn't about jealousy, not anymore. I'd moved past that. It was about the gulf that had grown between my two worlds. No matter how much I achieved in uniform, no matter how many operations I supported, at home I was just the one who never quite measured up. The conversation drifted back to Alex, as it always did. He was going on about his new company car, how his boss had personally congratulated him in front of the whole office, how the dealership had thrown in custom rims just because. My mother clapped politely, smiling with a mixture of pride and relief. She was happiest when things were peaceful, when no one argued, when Alex could shine and I stayed quiet. I tried, I really did, to ignore the sting. But then my father turned to me, his voice just a shade too loud. "You know, Macy, I hope you'll find your thing one day," he said, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Not everyone needs to chase big dreams. Some people are just steady, reliable. Alex grinned. Yeah, not everyone can be a rock star. A dozen retorts bubbled to my lips, some clever, some cutting, but I swallowed them all. Instead, I looked at Dr. Harper, who met my eyes with a small, knowing nod. She understood. She'd seen the classified reports, had sat in on the late-night briefings, and knew the weight of what I carried. For a moment, I felt less alone. But the damage was done. My father's words echoed in my mind, not because they were cruel, I'd heard worse, but because they threatened something deeper, my sense of self. It wasn't just an insult, it was a crack in the armor I'd built between my two worlds. I barely touched my food for the rest of the evening. After dinner, my mother fussed over the dishes while Alex showed something on his phone, probably photos of his new car. I slipped out onto the back deck, letting the cool Texas air clear my head. The city lights glimmered in the distance, but the house behind me felt like it belonged to someone else. That's when my phone buzzed. A secure message, just one line, a status update required. Confirm current location. It was protocol, but the timing was brutal. I closed my eyes, counted to 5, and texted back, updating my duty status as he on leave, Austin, Texas. I added my parents' address, knowing that, if the operation moved up, the army would know exactly where to find me. Inside, I could still hear Alex's laughter and my father's voice, the sounds of a family that had written me out of the script years ago. For a moment, I wondered what would happen if my two worlds ever really met, if they saw what I saw, knew what I knew. Would it change anything? Or would I always be the supporting character, even when the story was mine? That night, I dreamed of helicopters, of rotors pounding the sky, of the old Miller rules of finally breaking down. By sunrise, the weight of the dinner still sat on my chest. Old feelings had a way of sticking around in the Miller house, lingering in the paint and settling between the picture frames. As I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, I traced the pattern of medals I'd tacked on the wall as a teenager, mostly to prove something to myself, since nobody else ever looked. The army values had become more than slogans to me. They were armor, sharper and sturdier than anything I wore on duty. Downstairs, the day moved on as if nothing had happened. Dad mowed the lawn, barking orders at Alex to help with the sprinklers. Mom made pancakes, humming to herself, her tone a shade lighter than usual, relieved, perhaps, that another family dinner was over. I drifted through the morning in silence, letting them move around me like a river flowing past a stone. My phone, never far from reach, buzzed with a coded update from my commanding officer. For everyone else, Saturday meant relaxation, errands, maybe an afternoon baseball game. For me, every a day off was just another day to watch, to wait, to be ready. I double-checked my go bag in the closet, making sure my Army ID, encrypted phone, and a fresh set of uniforms were ready. I'd left the habit of being prepared behind only once, and I'd never let that happen again. Sometimes, I imagined telling my family everything, just laying it all out on the table, no filters, no gentle lies. I pictured their faces as I described classified missions, early mornings on base, or nights spent piecing together intelligence with 3 cups of coffee and no sleep. The image was as laughable as it was painful. Dad would call it overreacting. Alex would shrug and go back to his Instagram stories. Only Mom might have understood, and even then, she'd worry more about my safety than the actual impact of my work. In truth, I was 2 people living in 2 worlds that were never supposed to touch. At home, I played the invisible daughter, wearing old jeans and blending in. At Fort Hood, and sometimes at the Pentagon, I was Raven, an intelligence officer trusted with secrets that could topple governments or save lives. There, my word had weight. Colonels listened. Generals asked for my opinion. There, I wasn't as steady and reliable, I was indispensable. The contrast was jarring every time I crossed that line. I remembered one particular morning, not long before my trip home, sitting in a windowless briefing room. The only woman at the table. 3 colonels and a civilian director, older men, sharp in their uniforms, waited on my analysis. I stood by the screen, pointer in hand, breaking down the data from a cluster of hot zones halfway across the world. My voice was steady, controlled, as I outlined the threat, suggested the strategy, and summarized the odds. A younger colonel leaned back in his chair, skeptical. "Raven, that's a bold prediction. What's your confidence level?" Before I could answer, Director Mason, my direct supervisor, spoke up. "Last time Raven made a bold prediction, she saved 30 American lives and 2 hostages. If she says the numbers, we trust the numbers." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of projectors and the scribble of pens on paper. And in that moment, I felt seen, truly seen, in a way I never was at home. Now, back in my parents' guest room, those memories clashed with the ordinary messiness of family life. I caught a glimpse of myself in the dresser mirror, hair pulled back, army-issue watch, a faded high school t-shirt. I barely recognized myself. Was I still Macy Miller? Or just Raven in civilian clothes, waiting for the next call? My mom knocked softly, breaking the quiet. "Honey, are you joining us for breakfast?" she asked, her voice careful, as if afraid of waking something dangerous. I nodded, managing a smile. "Be right there, Mom." Downstairs, the conversation turned to Alex's upcoming trip to Miami, Dad's latest real estate deal, and the heat wave forecasted for next week. Nobody mentioned last night. Nobody mentioned me. I found myself tuning out, eyes drifting to the window, scanning the sky out of habit. I was half listening when Mom spoke again, a hint of worry creeping in. "You know, Macy, your father just wants you to be happy. He's proud of you. He just doesn't always know how to show it." I stirred my coffee, unsure what to say. The words didn't sting, but they didn't comfort me either. I'd heard them all my life. "It's fine, Mom." Really? But it wasn't. And somewhere deep down, I knew the collision of my 2 worlds was coming, faster than anyone could see. That night, I logged onto my secure army laptop. The glow of the screen cut through the darkness of my old bedroom, a silent reminder of everything my family would never know. I typed up my daily report, noting my temporary location, flagging my father's careless dinner comments as a minor security breach. Nothing major, just another detail in a world built on secrets. I closed the lid and lay back on the bed, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the distant drone of city traffic. The boundary between Macy and Raven had never felt thinner. For a moment, I wondered, when the storm finally landed, would anyone in this house be ready for it? Would I? The next morning dawned sharp and bright, as if the Texas sun had something to prove. I woke before anyone else and went for a run through our quiet Austin neighborhood, pounding the sidewalk past neat lawns and sleepy houses. The familiar route did little to settle the jumble of thoughts in my head. Every step, every breath was a reminder of the life I'd carved out far from here, a life where running meant prepping for fitness tests, not just clearing my mind. Back home, the house was still waking up. Dad's voice rumbled from the living room as he debated real estate prices with a neighbor on speakerphone. Alex's music leaked from his room in tinny bursts. The comforting routine should have made me feel at ease, but all I could think about was the message I'd received before sunrise. Operation Daystar status. Accelerated. Ready all assets. Stay mobile. Translation. Anything could happen, and I might have to move at a moment's notice. There was no space for error. After a quick shower, I checked my military laptop again. The classified inbox was filled with updates, satellite imagery, threat analyses, communications from Joint Base San Antonio. Each report felt like another stone in the rucksack strapped to my back. Normally, a mandatory family weekend would be reason enough to request an exception from command. But any excuse would sound suspicious. And the last thing I needed was my mother worrying. So I stayed, blending in, pretending to care about Alex's fantasy football league and Dad's grilling techniques. I didn't fool myself, though. I was counting hours, not days. Every phone buzz or creak in the house sent adrenaline shooting through my veins. At lunch, Alex launched into a story about his work trip to Las Vegas, a deal he'd closed, the bonus he was expecting, the hotel suite with a view of the Strip. Dad beamed, interrupting only to point out that this is what hard work gets you. My mother played along, offering praise like confetti, her smile a little too bright. The routine was so familiar it was almost soothing, but today it felt like watching a play I'd already seen 100 times. As I loaded my plate with salad, Dad turned to me with his favorite question. So, Macy, when are you going to get yourself a real car? Maybe Alex can help you find something decent. It was meant as a joke, but I felt Dr. Harper's steady gaze from across the table. She was here again, invited for lunch after the fun of the night before. She offered me a tiny, reassuring nod. I took a breath, careful not to react. I'll let you know, Dad. Alex grinned, launching into a lecture about lease rates and insurance. For the 100th time, I became invisible at my own table, my accomplishments ghosted over, my life rewritten by their expectations. But beneath the surface, a cold professionalism was taking over. Every slight, every dismissive joke was another push toward the wall I built to survive. I had learned to compartmentalize. Family pain went in one box, military stress in another. It was the only way to stay sharp when lives depended on it. That afternoon, I slipped upstairs to my room, pretending to need a nap. I closed the door, locked it, and sat at my small desk, opening the army laptop again. I updated my location file, still at parents' house, still on standby. I ran through emergency procedures for exfiltration. If my secure code came in, I'd have 10 minutes to grab my bag and reach the closest open space for pickup. A Black Hawk would be dispatched, no explanations, no time for goodbyes. The logistics of it all felt almost comforting in their certainty. That night, the backyard filled with relatives for an early summer barbecue, my dad's attempt to impress the neighbors and show off the new grill. Laughter floated in the air, mixed with the smell of grilled steak and the sound of clinking ice in lemonade glasses. I watched from the sidelines, hands wrapped around a sweating glass, watching Dad work the grill like a conductor at his own orchestra. At moments like this, I almost envied their world, their ability to focus on little things, to argue about sports or politics and believe it mattered. But I was always on the outside, caught between the world I grew up in and the world I'd chosen. As the sun set, orange light streaked the sky. My phone vibrated on the patio table. Stand by. Priority upgrade. Be ready for immediate recall. I stared at the message, heart racing. This was it. The storm I'd sensed was almost here. In the background, Alex was boasting about his new golf clubs. Dad toasted to a family success. And I sat perfectly still, watching the clouds gather, knowing that soon, the two halves of my life would crash together in a way none of them could imagine. I finished my lemonade, set the glass down with a deliberate clink, and looked up at the stars peeking through the dusk. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many truths I longed to share. But for now, I just waited, as I'd always done, ready to answer the call, even if no one else ever knew what it cost me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glow of my military laptop, the urgent warnings flashing on the screen. The army had a saying, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. I lived by it. But I also heard the echoes of my father's laughter, Alex's offhand jokes, my mother's soft voice drifting up the stairs. I was straddling two worlds, and the line between them was growing thinner with every hour. At 3 a.m., a secure message came through. The subject line was a code I recognized instantly, a Nightfall protocol, activation window pending. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. The operation, whatever shape it would take, was on the move. My role was to remain in place until exfiltration or further notice, blending in as if nothing had changed. Downstairs, the house was silent. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Outside, the Austin air was heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and distant rain. I stood by the window and watched the shadows slide across the lawn, wondering how many more nights I would see this view as Mesa Miller, daughter and sister, before the world demanded Raven, the officer. Morning came grey and humid. I joined the family for breakfast, putting on my best and normal Macy a face. Dad was already dressed for his golf outing, discussing tea times on the phone. Alex was scrolling through his phone, half listening to Mom's plans for Sunday brunch. Nobody noticed how distracted I was, how my fork barely touched the eggs, how my eyes flicked constantly to my phone. The only one who might have sensed it was Dr. Harper, who'd come by with homemade cinnamon rolls and a gentle smile. She watched me, her gaze steady, and when we found a quiet moment in the kitchen, she murmured, "Stay sharp, Macy. You're not alone." The words hit me harder than I expected. I managed a grateful nod, swallowing the urge to say more. In another life, Dr. Harper might have been the mentor I'd always wished for. In this one, she was my silent ally, a thread of understanding woven through a tapestry of secrecy. The day crawled by in slow motion. I played my part, helping Mom prep for the next family meal, listening to Dad's stories about his college days, nodding along as Alex described his fantasy football lineup for the 100th time. On the outside, I was just another daughter home for the weekend. On the inside, every muscle was wound tight, waiting for the call. By late afternoon, the clouds rolled in. Thunder rumbled over the city, making the windows shake. I watched the sky, alert for movement. My phone, always in my pocket, buzzed again, a single vibration, different from the usual alerts. I unlocked it with trembling hands and saw the message. EAM 77 Delta. Stand by for imminent action. My breath caught. This was no drill. The window for the operation had opened, and my world was about to change. I quietly slipped upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and ran through my checklist one final time. Go bag. Ready. Army ID and secure phone. Ready. Route to the nearest extraction point, Dad's prized front lawn, ironically the perfect landing zone for a helicopter. Ready. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded, trying to slow my racing pulse. I thought of the years I'd spent building walls between these two lives, walls I'd once believed were unbreakable. Yet here I was, waiting for a military exfiltration in the very house where my family believed my biggest challenge was public transportation. My mind flickered through memories. Childhood birthdays spent watching Alex open presents. Quiet victories, academic decathlon wins, state chess tournaments, forgotten in the shadow of my brother's louder successes. Every missed holiday, every time a money's tight ear applied only to me. But I also remembered moments that belonged to no one but me. Cold mornings on the base, hot coffee in hand as the sun rose over rows of armored vehicles. The satisfaction of solving an intelligence puzzle that had stumped a dozen others. The adrenaline rush of knowing my analysis could save lives. For years, I'd believed these worlds could never meet. Now, as the first drops of rain spattered against the window, I realized they were about to collide, and the fallout would be bigger than anything I'd imagined. A knock at the door startled me. It was my mother, soft-eyed and worried. "Sweetheart, are you all right? You've been so quiet. If you want to talk, I'm here." I almost told her. The truth hovered on the tip of my tongue. "Mom, I'm not just a government clerk. I'm an Army intelligence officer, and tonight, everything changes." But the words never left my lips. Instead, I hugged her, tighter than usual, and said, "I love you, Mom. I really do." She smiled, brushing my hair from my face. "I love you too, Macy. No matter what." As she left, I felt the weight of everything unsaid settle on my shoulders. I turned back to the window, watched the storm roll in, and waited for the sound that would signal the end of the old life and the start of something new. In that suspended moment, I was neither Macy nor Raven. I was both, and I was ready. The storm outside was gathering speed by the time the barbecue kicked off. Dad insisted the rain would hold off, clinging to the hope that his perfect lawn wouldn't be ruined by a passing shower or, worse, muddy footprints from the cousins' kids. The family was in full display, uncles, aunts, neighbours, all laughing too loudly, clutching sodas and paper plates heavy with ribs and potato salad. I watched from the patio, glass of lemonade sweating in my hand, feeling like a stranger at my own family's party. All day, I'd felt the electricity building, not just from the coming thunder, but in my bones, a prickle of anticipation that made my skin hum. I glanced at my watch. Every second dragged. I replayed my plan in my head. If the call came, I'd have 2 minutes to get to the front yard. There would be no explanations, no time to soften the blow. It would be all action, no apologies. Alex was showing off his new driver, swinging it on the edge of the yard. My father, grill tongs raised like a trophy, held court near the barbecue. My mother's voice drifted through the screen door, fussing over dessert. I watched them all, each lost in their rituals, none of them suspecting how close their world was to upheaval. Then, my watch vibrated, a single, silent pulse. I glanced down, a new message, just a string of code. EAM 77 Delta. Proceed to extraction. Immediate. My breath caught. For a split second, the world shrank to a pinpoint. I stood up, set my glass on the table, and wiped the condensation from my palm onto my jeans. Every motion was practiced, rehearsed in my head so many times it felt automatic. As I crossed the patio, the thumping began. faint at first, like distant drums. Dad waved his tongs, annoyed, thinking it was a neighbor's music. But the sound grew, louder, lower, deeper. The ground began to shake. Someone's plate clattered to the flagstone. Heads turned. Conversations stuttered and died. Above the tree line, the helicopter rose, a matte black shape, fierce and otherworldly. Its rotors carved the air, bending the trees, flattening the carefully manicured grass. Napkins and paper cups flew. The bouncy castle for the kids buckled and sagged as the downdraft slammed into it. The noise was deafening, a physical force you could feel in your teeth. Neighbors rushed out onto their lawns, phones raised, recording the spectacle. In the chaos, my father's face went from irritation to full-blown panic. "My lawn," he shouted, voice lost in the roar. "The roses." Alex just stood frozen, golf club hanging limp at his side. My mother emerged onto the patio, hands pressed to her cheeks, eyes wide with terror. The Black Hawk hovered 50 feet above the yard, a vision out of every Hollywood war movie, but this was no movie. The side door slid open with a sharp hydraulic hiss. Inside, a crew chief in full tactical gear scanned the backyard through his helmet visor, then pointed straight at me. A voice boomed from the helicopter's external speakers, slicing through the shrieks and the storm. "Raven, your transport is here. Wheels up in 2 minutes. Move now." Silence fell like a curtain. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. My father's spatula hit the ground with a clatter. Alex gaped, lips moving but no sound coming out. My mother swayed, grabbing the doorframe for support. I walked forward, my boots sinking into the flattened grass, each step echoing with finality. The wind from the rotors whipped my hair, plastering it to my cheeks, but I didn't stop. I barely noticed the neighbors filming, the cousins yelling questions. I felt only the certainty of mission, the clarity that had always eluded me at home. Halfway across the yard, I turned back just once. My father's face was ashen, his anger gone, replaced by something like fear, or maybe awe. My mother had sunk to her knees on the wet lawn, the party forgotten. For a single, suspended moment, I felt everything and nothing at once: grief, relief, pride, loss. And then I climbed aboard the Black Hawk. Inside, the noise dulled, replaced by the clipped efficiency of military life. The crew chief handed me a headset, his eyes crinkling in a silent greeting I recognized from years in the field. "Good to see you, Raven. We've got a seat up front. Director Mason wants you plugged in right away." I nodded, strapping in as the helicopter lifted off. Through the window, the world of family cookouts and old wounds shrank, replaced by the only world that had ever made sense, one of mission, purpose, and action. I glanced down at the yard below, at the chaos left in my wake. My father's lawn was wrecked, the roses flattened. But this time, I didn't feel sorry. For the first time, they saw a piece of who I truly was. The Black Hawk banked north, away from Austin, toward the storm, and toward whatever waited for me on the other side. The instant the heavy door of the Black Hawk slid shut behind me, the chaos of my family's backyard vanished, replaced by the insulated hum of rotors and clipped voices in my headset. The air inside was cool, tinged with the scent of metal and machine oil. Familiar. Safe, in its own brutal way. For the first time in days, my pulse slowed, my focus sharpening to a blade's edge. A crew chief nodded to me, his gloved hand guiding me to a jump seat already prepped with a ruggedized tablet and comms gear. I was barely buckled in when my headset crackled to life. Raven, this is Director Mason. Situations developing. Pull up your briefing. Roger that, sir, EI replied, fingers already flying over the touchscreen. The helicopter banked hard, banking north, leaving the suburban sprawl of Austin behind. In the distance, thunder rolled, a fitting soundtrack for the operation unfolding in real time. My world shrank to the glowing map, the encrypted chat windows, the streaming data feeds. Satellite imagery flickered across my screen, showing a small, unstable region thousands of miles away. Indicators blipped red, then amber, as I scanned for threats, troop movements, cyber intrusions, suspicious banking activity. It all clicked into place, the puzzle I'd been working for weeks, now shifting and reshaping itself by the minute. Director Mason's voice was calm but urgent. Nightfall protocol is active. The primary target is on the move. We believe it's a feint, diversion to draw our assets off the real objective. I tapped out my assessment, flagging secondary routes, calling out a likely switch near the border of a neighboring state. My analysis was fast, decisive, a lifetime's worth of games, puzzles, and coded riddles training me for moments just like this. Adjust vector to sector delta, EI said into the MIC, sending the data to the crew chief and the ground team. Main adversary is likely heading for the secondary facility. If we keep our drones on primary, we'll miss the transfer. Copy. Raven. Your call, your show, a Mason replied, no hesitation in his tone. Outside, lightning danced along the clouds, illuminating the landscape below in fleeting, blue-white flashes. The only reminders of my old life were the trembling in my hands as I gripped the edge of my seat, and the memory of my father's stunned face as I left him standing in the wreckage of his perfectly kept lawn. For the next 2 hours, the world was a blur of encrypted chatter, fast decisions, and shifting priorities. I worked side by side with the crew, reviewing live intelligence feeds, coordinating with special operations units on the ground. At one point, a new threat vector appeared, an anomaly in the digital signature of one of our own assets. Could be spoofed, EI said, flagging the feed. If they are mirroring our comms, we need to cycle encryption keys, now. The crew chief relayed my warning. Within minutes, the chatter changed. We cut off the breach before it could grow. Director Mason came back on the line, approval in his voice. Good catch, Raven. That just saved us a world of trouble. In the cockpit, the pilots joked quietly about barbecue invitations and Texas thunderstorms, but inside the cabin, the mood was all business. I slipped deeper into the role I knew best, not daughter, not forgotten sibling, but officer, analyst, guardian. And for the first time all weekend, I didn't feel divided. As the operation moved toward resolution, the adrenaline gradually receded. I checked my inbox, already filling with requests for after-action reports and debriefs. I took a long breath, feeling the last shreds of tension from my old life fade away, replaced by the focused exhaustion that always came after a crisis averted. The crew chief caught my eye as we circled back toward base, the storm now miles behind us. You good, Raven? I nodded, managing a tired smile. Yeah. Just thinking about what comes next. He grinned, adjusting his headset. Whatever it is, you'll handle it. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the gentle vibration of the Black Hawk lull me into a brief, meditative calm. In my mind's eye, I replayed the last few days, family dinners, barbed jokes, the ache of wanting to be seen for who I really was. But all of that seemed smaller now, less important, compared to the lives that had been protected because I'd been where I was needed. By the time we touched down at base, dawn was streaking the sky with pink and gold. The world had changed again, and so had I. As I stepped out of the helicopter, boots hitting the tarmac, I felt it: relief, pride, and something like freedom. My old life was behind me, at least for now. The next steps would be harder, facing my family again, or maybe deciding not to. But for this moment, at least, I was exactly where I belonged. 3 months after the Black Hawk landed in my parents' yard and whisked me out of the world I'd grown up in, I found myself standing under the muted lights of the Situation Room in Washington, D.C. The room was smaller than the movies made it out to be. No marble columns, no gold-trimmed flags, just a wall of screens and the quiet intensity of people who made decisions that rippled across continents. I wasn't there as a Mesa Miller, the quiet disappointment, or as the invisible sister. Here, I was Captain Raven Miller, lead analyst for Operation Nightfall, a name that now meant something far bigger than any neighborhood gossip. My uniform fit differently now, not just on my body, but on my soul. The operation had ended in success. The threat neutralized. A crisis, averted so quietly the world would never know how close it came to chaos. The aftermath was a whirlwind of briefings, classified cables, and late nights combing through data. For the first time, I was at the center of it all, not as a footnote but as a voice people listened to. Director Mason stood beside me as I presented the final debrief to the President's National Security Advisor. When the advisor lobbed a question about long-term risks, Mason simply gestured to me. "Captain Miller has the current assessment, sir." He used my real name. In that place, at that moment, it was more than a name. It was recognition, a quiet validation I'd never gotten around my family's dining table. My analysis stood on its own. No one cared who my brother was, what car I drove, or how I got to work. The only thing that mattered was competence. After the briefing, Mason clapped me on the shoulder as we left the room. "Good work, Miller. Take some downtime. You've earned it." I did, but not in the way my family might imagine. There were no trips to fancy resorts, no public celebrations. Instead, I found myself in a dimly lit bar tucked into a quiet DC neighborhood, surrounded by the only people who really understood the weight of the last few months. There were maybe a dozen of us: analysts, operators, comms specialists. Not a flashy group, but a team bound by the kind of loyalty that doesn't need words. We swapped stories, shared tired jokes, let ourselves be vulnerable in a way we never could in the field. One of the operators, a man whose life my last-minute change in mission priorities had quite literally saved, lifted his glass. "To Raven," he said, voice steady and respectful. Around the table, a chorus echoed back, a rare, genuine warmth in every face. They laughed about my so-called a government desk job, turning my father's old jab into a badge of honor. I found myself laughing too, no bitterness, just relief that I no longer needed to pretend. They saw me as I was, not just for what I'd done, but for the tenacity it took to keep doing it in the shadows. Later, back in my DC apartment, I finally let myself read the text my father had sent 2 weeks after the extraction. It was awkward, tentative. "Your mother asks about you. We saw you on the news, standing behind the senator. We didn't know." That was it. No apology. No real attempt to bridge the gap. For a moment, I waited to feel something: anger, pride, disappointment. But I felt only a gentle emptiness, as if the last balance in the old family ledger had finally been zeroed out. I archived the message, then looked at the small framed photo on my desk. Not my family, but my team, smiling, laughing, arms around each other after that night at the bar. For the first time, I understood that a family could mean something you built, not just something you inherited. It was late. The city outside was just a mosaic of glowing windows and distant sirens. I sat at my kitchen table, spreading out the files for my next assignment, knowing that the world was waiting, another threat, another puzzle, another chance to serve. For years, I tried to win the love and respect of people who only ever saw what they wanted to see. I tried to keep my world separate, afraid of what might happen if they collided. But standing here now, with my boots on solid ground and my real family just a phone call away, I knew I was done chasing ghosts. I was Mason Miller and Captain Raven, daughter and officer, survivor and leader. My peace was my own, earned and paid for. I took a long, quiet breath, set aside the weight of old expectations, and opened the next file. There was still work to do. And I was ready. Weeks rolled into months. The tempo of my life quickened and then settled again, each day bookended by the steady pulse of duty and the quiet rituals I'd created for myself. Some nights, after finishing a shift at headquarters or wrapping up another round of classified briefs, I'd sit by the window of my apartment and watch the city below, its lights blinking like signals from 1,000 different stories, each one oblivious to mine. My old life in Austin seemed almost fictional now, as if those endless family dinners and neighborhood barbecues belonged to someone else. The ache of not being seen had faded. In its place, there was a new clarity. I was more than the sum of my family's expectations, and far more than the roles they'd assigned me. Still, memory is a stubborn thing. On quiet evenings, I sometimes caught myself wondering what it would have been like if things had been different. If my father had cared less about the length of the lawn and more about the depth of his daughter's courage. If my brother had looked up from his latest conquest long enough to see what real achievement looked like. But wishing for the impossible was something I'd outgrown. Instead, I gave thanks for what I'd found: purpose, belonging, a family of my own making. I thought about my team often, about the code names, the inside jokes, the sense of being trusted in rooms where every word mattered. I thought about Director Mason, who never cared where I came from, only what I could do. About the operators who teased me about taking the bus, turning my father's jab into a source of laughter and pride. About Dr. Harper, whose presence at my family table had meant more than I ever admitted. We'd kept in touch, her messages a quiet reminder that true mentors were rare and invaluable. There were days when the past tried to pull me back, like the evening I found a birthday card from my mother in my mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, careful, hopeful. "We miss you. Hope you're safe and happy. Love, Mom." I turned the card over in my hands for a long time. The old urge to reply, to bridge the distance, was strong. But the moment passed, gentle and bittersweet. I set the card beside the photo of my team, one family. Chosen, the other, given by fate. Maybe, I thought, you can love both. Maybe you can move forward without closing the door behind you. One night in late fall, as leaves swirled on DC streets and the air took on a new chill, I met my team at a little bar we'd claimed as our own. The walls were covered with old unit patches and black and white photos from wars long past. The bartender greeted us with a nod, already pouring the usual round. We talked about everything and nothing: new missions, dumb movies, the best tacos in the city. I told the story, for the first time, of the day the Black Hawk landed in my father's yard. They laughed until there were tears, but their laughter wasn't cruel. It was understanding, the kind of knowing only those who've lived double lives can share. "You know," said Maria, "our comms specialist, and maybe your dad was right. The right ride really does make all the difference." I grinned, raising my glass. Just not the one he expected. There was peace in that moment, a shared acceptance that we were exactly where we belonged, not despite the struggles, but because of them. As the night wore on, the conversation drifted, and I found myself watching the reflection of my own smile in the bar mirror. Strong. Real. Mine. Later, walking home under the city's bright glow, I thought about all the miles I'd traveled since leaving Austin, the places I'd seen, the lives I'd touched, the battles I'd fought, both internal and out loud. I knew there would be more storms ahead, more nights where the weight of responsibility felt almost too much to bear. But I also knew that I would never again let someone else define my worth, or wait for approval from a world that never really understood me. My phone buzzed, a new message, this time from Director Mason. "Ready for another round, Captain? The team wants your eyes on this." I smiled as I typed my reply, feeling the old anticipation mix with a new, steady confidence. "Always ready, sir. See you at 0600. Back in my apartment, I paused by the window one last time. The city was still alive, still pulsing with possibility. I breathed in, slow and deep, letting the moment fill me, not with regret, but with a quiet certainty that I had built a life I could be proud of. Not for anyone else, not for a line in a family scrapbook, but for myself. Because I was Mason Miller, Army captain, strategist, friend, and daughter. Because in the end, the most important battles are the ones you fight to be seen, by others, and finally, by yourself. And because sometimes the right ride home isn't a car at all, but a Black Hawk in the Texas sky and the courage to answer the call.